The night air in Canton pressed down like a damp velvet curtain, heavy with the scent of brine and the sweet rot of river mud lanterns bobbed along the teeming waterfront, their golden light flickering across rain-slicked cobblestones, painting trembling halos on puddles. Overhead, the sky was a bruised tapestry, clouds swollen and purple, threatening another downpour. From the harbor, the clamor of the city rose in waves, the distant yells of dock workers, the metallic clank of anchor chains, the hollow slap of water against the hulls of moored junks. Inside the brothel, the world narrowed. Oil lamps cast a warm, wavering glow over faded silk tapestries and threadbare rugs. The air was thick with the mingled aromas of sandalwood incense, rice wine, and sweat. Laughter and music drifted from the main parlor, but in the cramped back room, Xu Yang sat alone, spine straight on a low wooden stool, her knees tucked beneath a table pitted with old knife marks. Her slender fingers traced the rim of a chipped porcelain cup, feeling the coolness seep into her skin, grounding her in this moment. Her eyes, dark as river stones, flicked to the door each time a footstep echoed in the corridor. The silk of her robe, a faded crimson, patched at the elbows, whispered against her skin. She was 22, but her gaze was older, sharpened by years of watching, listening, calculating. The brothel was a world of shifting masks, where every smile hid a price and every touch was a transaction. Here, survival depended on reading the smallest tremors in a man's voice, the flicker of his eyes, the tension in his jaw. Tonight, Xi Yang's senses were tuned to the thrum of danger. She could smell the tang of opium smoke curling from the next room, hear the muffled sob of a new girl pressed into service, the scrape of coins on lacquered wood above it all. There was an undercurrent, a promise of change, the hush before a storm. She pressed her palm against her chest, feeling the quick drumbeat of her heart. Was it fear or anticipation? She could not say. She thought of the river just beyond these walls, its black waters carrying secrets to the sea. She thought of escape, how the word tasted, sharp, impossible, yet sweet as forbidden fruit. I will not die here. I will not be another ghost in these walls. There must be more than this, more than serving wine, more than bending to men's whims, more than waiting for the day. My beauty fades, and I am cast aside like a broken teacup. A gust of wind rattled the paper screens, and the lamp flame shivered, throwing shadows that danced along the cracked plaster. Xu Yang closed her eyes for a moment, drawing a slow breath. The scent of jasmine from her hair oil mingled with the salt air that crept in beneath the door. Her thoughts scattered, then gathered, sharp as a blade. Tonight, I will listen. I will watch, and when the moment comes, I will seize it. Whatever the cost, the city pulsed outside, the brothel hummed with secrets, and Xu Yang waited, poised on the edge of something she could not yet name. The door creaked open, letting in a draft that carried the sour tang of rain and the richer, muskier scent of a man's sweat. Two figures entered, Madame Li, the brothel's proprietress, and a stranger whose presence filled the cramped space like a thundercloud. Madame Li was a squat woman in her 40s, her hair lacquered into a tight knot, her robe a garish green patterned with faded gold cranes. Her eyes, always quick and calculating, darted between Xu Yang and the stranger, lips pursed as if she tasted something bitter. The man beside her was broad-shouldered, his face half hidden by the shadow of a conical straw hat. His robe was dark blue, the cloth heavy and fine, too fine for a fisherman or merchant. His hands, when he removed his hat, were large and calloused, the fingers adorned with jade rings. His eyes, small, sharp, and cold as polished steel, fixed on Xu Yang. "Xu Yang," Madame Li said, her voice syrupy with false warmth. "This is Master Cheng. He has requested your company." Xu Yang dipped her head, masking her unease. "Of course, Madame Li." Her hand smoothed her robe, fingertips brushing the mended silk. She rose, the soles of her slippers whispering against the floor. Master Cheng's gaze lingered on her, appraising there was something predatory in the tilt of his mouth, the way he measured the room before settling into a low chair. He gestured for Xu Yang to sit across from him. "Wine," he said, voice rough as gravel. Xu Yang poured, the rice wine glinting amber in the lamplight. The fragrance was sharp, almost medicinal. She offered the cup with both hands, eyes lowered in practiced deference. He took it, his fingers brushing hers, deliberately, lingering a fraction too long. "You are not from Canton," he observed, his accent tinged with the dialect of the southern coast. "My family came from the north. The river brought us here." "And left you stranded," he said, a smile flickering at the corner of his mouth. "Xu Yang is clever, Master Cheng. She speaks 3 dialects and can recite poetry. Her wit is as sharp as her tongue." Madame Li hovered, eyes gleaming. Xu Yang's pulse quickened. She felt the weight of their attention, the silent negotiations that passed between them. She wondered what price Madame Li hoped to extract, and what Master Cheng truly wanted. Master Cheng leaned forward, his breath tinged with garlic and wine. "Tell me, Xu Yang, do you enjoy your work here?" A pause. The question was a trap, and she knew it. She offered a small, enigmatic smile. "A woman learns to find pleasure in survival, Master Cheng." Spoken like a gambler. He laughed, a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in his chest. "Xu Yang is loyal. She knows her place." Madame Li's eyes narrowed, her fingers drumming on the table. Xu Yang caught the warning in Madame Li's tone. She felt the old anger simmering beneath her calm. Loyal loyalty, in this place, was a leash. "And if you could leave, Xu Yang, what would you do?" Master Cheng's gaze sharpened. She hesitated, the words catching in her throat. "Li, or risk the truth. She chose a careful middle path. I would go where the wind takes me. I would find a life that is mine alone. You have spirit, too much for these walls. He studied her, eyes glittering. Master Chung, if you wish to discuss business. Madame Li bristled. I do. I have need of someone with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. Someone who knows how to listen and when to stay silent. He cut her off with a dismissive wave. Xu Yang's heart thudded. Was this a proposition or a test? She glanced at Madame Li, whose face had gone pinched and pale. I am loyal to Madame Li, Xu Yang said, the words tasting like ashes. Loyalty is a coin easily spent. Master Chung smiled, slow and sly. The tension in the room thickened. Rain hammered against the window, drowning out the music from the main parlor. Xu Yang's hands trembled, but she stilled them, clutching the wine cup as if it were an anchor. Xu Yang belongs to me until her debt is paid. Madame Li leaned in, voice low. Everything has a price. Master Chung's voice was silk over steel. Xu Yang felt the air shift, a storm gathering, the future trembling on the edge of a blade. And what is my price, Master Chung? She met Master Chung's gaze, unflinching. Not silver, not gold. I offer you a choice. Stay and rot in these walls, or come with me and learn what it means to be truly free. He grinned, teeth white in the lamplight. A silence fell, thick as honey. Madame Li's face twisted with fury, but she said nothing. Xu Yang's heart raced. Fear and hope tangled, impossible to separate. Master Chung rose, adjusting his robe, his movements deliberate. I will return tomorrow. Decide by then. He swept from the room, the scent of sea air trailing after him. Do not forget who owns you. Madame Li glared at Xu Yang, her voice a hiss. No one owns the wind, madam. Xu Yang met her gaze, a spark of defiance flaring. The door slammed, and Xu Yang was alone, breathless, trembling, and suddenly aware that her life had shifted. The old world cracking open to reveal something wild and unknown. The rain drummed harder, and Xu Yang found herself drifting back to another night, years ago, when the world was water and wind, spray and thunder. The sky above the South China Sea glowered with bruised clouds, their bellies swollen and restless, as if waiting to split open and drown the world below. Lightning forked the horizon, painting the ragged sails of the red flag fleet in ghostly white. Each rumble of thunder trembled through the wooden ribs of the junk, vibrating up through Xu Yang's bare soles and into her bones. She stood at the prow, hair plastered to her cheeks by rain, the taste of salt sharp on her lips. Her hands, calloused from years of serving tea and secrets, gripped the slick rail. The wind slapped her face raw, and the rain stung her skin like 1,000 tiny needles. Every breath she drew was heavy with the sense of tar, wet rope, and the tang of brine. undercut by the faint, sour aroma of stale rice and sweat drifting up from the lower decks. Behind her, the rest of the fleet bobbed like black shadows. Their red banners, those infamous flags, snapping and writhing in the storm. Lanterns swung wildly from the masts, their weak orange light barely holding back the gloom, casting monstrous, shifting shapes across the deck. The shouts of sailors, gruff, anxious, sometimes laughing too loudly, rose above the roar of the sea, mingled with the hollow thud of boots and the creak of timber straining against the waves. Shi Yang's heart pounded in her chest, but her face betrayed nothing. She was cold and soaked, but she would not shiver. Not now, not with the eyes of so many men, pirates, everyone, watching her, weighing her worth. She forced herself to stand tall, chin lifted, eyes fixed on the horizon where the next bolt of lightning might split the world open. Tonight, she was no longer Shi Yang, the girl from Canton's back alleys, the clever courtesan who had learned to read men's hearts and fears. Tonight, she would become Ching Shih, wife to the pirate Lord Chunguan, by his side in the teeth of the storm, bound by vows spoken over thunder and blood. She drew a slow breath, feeling the chill air burn her lungs. Was this freedom, or another kind of chain? The question gnawed at her, sharp and insistent. She remembered the brothel's narrow rooms, the stifling heat, the endless parade of hungry eyes. She remembered the bargains she'd struck, the secrets she'd stolen, the small, hard kernel of herself she'd never let anyone touch. Now she stood on the edge of the world, a woman about to step into legend. But at what cost? The rain washed her face clean, but not her doubts. The ship lurched, and she steadied herself, blinking rain from her lashes. She glanced down at her hands, nails trimmed short, knuckles scarred, a faint bruise along her wrist where a customer's grip had lingered too long. She flexed her fingers, feeling the ache, the memory of old pain. She would not be owned again. Not by Chung Rai, not by any man, not even by the sea itself. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the figure striding toward her. Tall, broad-shouldered, his red silk robe plastered dark to his skin, hair tied back with a strip of crimson cloth. Chung Warren, pirate lord of the South China Sea. Her soon-to-be husband Shi Yang straightened her spine. Whatever storm awaited her, she would meet it head-on, eyes open, heart steeled. Tonight, she would make her own bargain with fate. Chung Wan's footsteps rang out on the wet deck, steady and assured despite the rolling of the ship. His face was carved in shadow and light, rainwater tracing the lines at the corners of his eyes and mouth. He stopped before Shi Yang, his gaze lingering on her, assessing, perhaps admiring, perhaps something else entirely around them. The crew gathered in a loose circle, their faces half lit by the swaying lanterns, curiosity and suspicion mingling in their eyes. A smaller figure edged closer, trying to blend into the background, but failing under the scrutiny of so many Chung Po Tsai. The boy with the quick hands and quicker mind stood just behind Chung Wang. His hair was cropped short, his jacket patched and faded, but his eyes gleamed with restless energy. He watched Shi Yang with a mix of awe and wariness, as if trying to decipher the secret of her calm. You do not flinch from the storm, Shi Yang. That is good. The sea does not favor the timid. I learned long ago that storms are only dangerous if you let them inside your heart. A wise answer. And what of pirates? Do we frighten you? Pirates are men, and men can be understood, bargained with, or outwitted. A ripple of laughter moved through the crew, but there was an edge to it. Some of the older sailors, faces tattooed, teeth stained with betel nut, exchanged glances. Chung Po Tsai shifted his weight, glancing nervously at Chung Wan, then at Shi Yang. Chung Wan leaned in, lowering his voice. You know the price of this bargain, Shi Yang. Once spoken, the vow cannot be broken, not by wind, nor wave, nor blade. Shi Yang's jaw tightened. She could feel the eyes on her, hungry for weakness. She straightened her shoulders, letting her voice ring clear. I know what I am choosing. I will not be a shadow in any man's house. If I am to stand beside you, it will be as your equal, my loyalty for my freedom. A murmur ran through the crowd. Surprise, perhaps, or outrage. One of the older pirates, a man with a silver ring through his nose, spat on the deck. A woman's place is... Chung Yai cut him off with a sharp gesture. Enough! This is my ship, my fleet, my law. Chung Po Tsai stepped forward, voice trembling with youth and challenge. And if the fleet does not accept her, what then? Will you force us to bow? Chung Yuan's eyes narrowed, but Shi Yang spoke before he could answer. Let them judge me by my deeds, not my sex, she said, her voice steady. I have survived worse than storms. I have learned the value of loyalty and the price of betrayal. Chung Po Tsai eyed her, searching for cracks. Words are wind, mistress. What will you do if the fleet turns on you? Shi Yang met his gaze, holding it. Then I will fight, or I will run, but I will never kneel. The wind howled, shaking the lanterns. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Chung Ai laughed, a deep, rolling sound that seemed to challenge the thunder itself. She is braver than half of you, he declared, sweeping his arm to encompass the crew. Tonight, we make a new pact, not just between man and woman, but between equals. Under heaven and sea, let all witness. He turned to Shi Yang, producing a small, battered cup. Its rim chipped, its glaze faded blue. He filled it with rice wine, hands steady despite the rocking of the ship. The scent of the wine mingled with the salt air, sharp and sweet. Drink, he said, offering the cup. Let the storm be our witness. Shi Yang took the cup, feeling the rough ceramic bite into her palm. She raised it to her lips, tasting the sharp tang of wine, the faint bitterness of old clay. She swallowed, the warmth burning a path down her throat. Chung-ai took the cup from her, drank in turn, then smashed it against the rail. The shards scattered across the deck, gleaming like teeth in the lantern light. From this night, you are Ching Shih, my wife, my partner, my equal, he intoned, voice ringing through the storm. The crew murmured, some bowing their heads, others watching with narrowed eyes. Chung Po Tsai lingered at the edge, his expression unreadable. The wind shrieked, and the rain fell harder, as if the heavens themselves were marking the moment. Shi Yang, now Ching Shih, stood unbowed, her heart hammering with fear and exhilaration. She had made her choice, for better or worse. The rain faded into memory, and for a moment, Ching Shih was a girl again. Shi Yang crouched behind a silk screen in the brothel's back room, heart pounding as she listened to the voices beyond. The brothel had always been a world of shadows and secrets. The heavy scent of sandalwood mingled with the sickly sweetness of cheap perfume, clinging to the faded tapestries and threadbare cushions. Oil lamps cast wavering golden pools across polished floorboards, illuminating the painted faces of the other girls, eyes rimmed in kohl, lips bright as legend. The dawn broke over the South China Sea in a bruised palette. Slate blue clouds streaked with veins of crimson and gold, the light sharp and uncertain as a drawn blade. The red flag fleet, nearly 100 ships strong, rocked gently on the long, rolling swells, their hulls black against the glimmering horizon. The air was thick with the scent of brine and tar, smoke from morning cook fires, and the faint, lingering memory of gunpowder above it all, the red flag, stitched from silk, and the blood of old enemies, snapped in the wind, a warning and a promise. On the deck of the flagship, Ching Shih stood alone, her bare feet cold against the damp planks. The wood was rough, still slick from the night's rain, and the salt stung the cuts on her heels. She drew her cloak tighter, the fabric heavy with the smell of sea and sweat. Its once bright red now faded by sun and spray. Her hair, long and black as a raven's wing, was twisted into a tight knot, pins biting into her scalp. She tasted the tang of salt on her lips, the ghost of an old wound on her tongue. Around her, the ship woke slowly. Men and women moved like shadows in the half-light, their voices low, their faces drawn with fatigue and hunger. The fleet had not raided in days. Supplies were thinning tempers fraying the clatter of wooden buckets, the creak of ropes, the slap of waves against the hull. Each sound echoed in Ching Shih's bones, a reminder that everything here was held together by her will alone. She let her gaze drift across the fleet. The smaller junks clustered close, sails patched with every color imaginable. Jade green, faded indigo, sun-bleached ochre. Smoke curled from a cook pot on the next deck, mingling with the sharper reek of fish guts and the sour tang of unwashed bodies. Farther off, the flagship's cannons glinted dully in the morning light, their iron mouths yawning at the sea. A gull wheeled overhead, its cry thin and hungry. Ching Shih's stomach twisted in sympathy. She pressed a hand to her belly, feeling the hard knot of tension that had lived there for days. Food was running low. Discipline was slipping whispers of mutiny, drifted like fog from ship to ship. She thought of the brothel in Canton, the stink of cheap wine and sweat, the silk screens hiding secrets and shame. She had clawed her way from that world with nothing but her wits and her iron will. Now she commanded the greatest pirate fleet the world had ever seen. And yet, every day, she felt the weight of it pressing down, threatening to drag her back beneath the waves. They would tear me apart if I falter. I am the chain that binds them. If I break, the whole fleet shatters. A sudden gust of wind whipped her cloak around her legs, cold and sharp. She closed her eyes, breathing in the morning. Salt, smoke, blood, sweat, the sense of survival. She was tired, yes, but she was not afraid. Let them come, let them test my rule. I will show them what it means to cross Ching Shih. The sun rose higher, burning away the clouds. The red flag snapped again, louder this time, as if in answer. Below deck, the air was thicker, laced with the musk of damp wood, oil lamps, and the faint metallic tang of weapons. Ching Shih ducked beneath a low beam, her fingers trailing along the rough grain, and entered the makeshift council room. It was little more than a cleared space among stacked barrels and bundles of stolen silk. But here, decisions were made that could topple kingdoms. Chung Po Tsai waited for her, perched on an overturned crate. He was barely 20, his face still soft with youth, but his eyes, dark, quick, and hungry, missed nothing. He wore a battered blue tunic, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms, roped with muscle and scars. At his belt hung a curved dagger, its hilt wrapped in faded red cloth. Beside him stood Old Yao, the quartermaster, skin as wrinkled as dried seaweed, hands always twitching with nervous energy. His robe was patched and stained, the hem crusted with salt. He glanced up as Ching Shih entered, bowing just enough to show respect without groveling. "Food stores are low," Old Yao began, his voice rough as gravel. "Rice and dried fish will not last the week. Some say we should raid the coast, now, before the Navy moves in. And some say a hasty raid will draw every Qing patrol from Canton to Hainan. We've lost 2 ships to the imperial dogs this month. We can't afford another mistake." Chung Po Tsai shot him a look. Ching Shih's eyes darted between them. She noted the tension in Chung's jaw, the way Old Yao's fingers drummed against his thigh. The air felt charged, every breath thick with unspoken challenge. She let the silence stretch, listening. The distant slap of waves, the faint groan of the hull, the muffled shouts of deckhands above. She tasted the bitterness of worry in her mouth. "Speak plainly, old Yao," she said, her voice soft but edged with steel. "Who spreads these rumors?" Old Yao hesitated, glancing at Chung Po Tsai, then back at her. "Some of the northern captains grumble. They say you favor your own, that the red flag's rules are too harsh. They remember Chung Un's way, more gold, less discipline. They remember a world that no longer exists. Without her law, this fleet would tear itself apart." Chung Po Tsai's lips curled in contempt. A tense silence. Ching Shih watched Chung, noting how his fingers curled around his dagger, the flicker of anger in his eyes. She saw herself reflected there, the hunger, the pride, the fear. She turned to old Yao. "And what do you say?" He swallowed, eyes darting. "I say, the men are hungry. Hungry men do foolish things." She stepped closer, her feet silent on the planks. The lantern light cast her shadow long across the floor. "Then remind them whose ships they serve. Remind them there is no gold without order, no freedom without law. If you wish, I'll speak to them myself, make an example, if needed." Chung Po Tsai straightened, voice low. Ching Shih shook her head. "Not yet. Fear is a blunt blade. We need loyalty. Loyalty that runs deeper than hunger. And if they refuse?" Old Yao's eyes widened. Ching Shih let her gaze linger on him, cold as winter rain. "Then they are no longer red flags, and they will learn what it means to betray an oath." A heavy silence settled. The only sound was the hiss of oil in the lamp, the slow drip of water from the beams above. "They respect you, Mother, even the ones who grumble. But they remembered Chung Ai's promises. Easy riches, full bellies, no questions asked." Chung Po Tsai broke the tension, voice softer. She felt a pang at the name, sharp as a knife between her ribs. Chung Ai, her late husband, the pirate lord, who had plucked her from the brothel and set her on this path. His ghost lingered in every corner, every shadow. She forced herself to stand taller. "This is not Chung Ring's fleet. It is mine, and my law is iron." Old Yao nodded, but his eyes were wary. "The men must eat, Captain, or they will find a leader who feeds them." Ching Shih turned away, her fists clenched. She felt the weight of it all, the fleet, the hunger, the ghosts of old promises, pressing down, threatening to split her apart. "If I show weakness now, I lose everything. But if I rule by fear alone, I become the thing I hate." She glanced at Chung Po Tsai, saw the flicker of doubt in his gaze, the loyalty warring with ambition. The council was over, but the battle had only begun. The memory came unbidden, sharp as the snap of a whip. Ching Shih was a girl again, crouched behind a beaded curtain in the brothel's back room, the air thick with incense and the sour stench of spilled wine. Outside, the city of Canton thrummed with life, rickshaws rattling over cobblestones, hawkers shouting in the morning market, the clang of temple bells mingling with the cries of beggars. She remembered the feel of silk beneath her fingers, soft, cool, a world away from the rough hemp she wore. Smile, girl. Men pay for beauty, not for tears. The madam's voice, cold and sharp as broken glass, echoed in her ears. She remembered watching the customers, fat merchants with gold rings, Qing officials in stiff brocade. End of chapter 3. The night pressed down like a velvet shroud, thick with the scent of brine and the looming threat of rain. Lanterns swayed from the rigging, their dull orange glow smeared across the slick, rolling deck of the flagship. Every flame flickered in the wind, casting restless shadows that danced along the weathered planks and the hunched backs of sailors far off. Thunder muttered over the horizon, a low, guttural promise of the storm to come. The air tasted of salt and copper, sharp and metallic, as if the sea itself was restless with old blood and new ambition. Ching Shih stood at the prow, her fingers curled tightly around the cold, damp wood of the rail spray bit at her face, mingling with the sweat that clung to her brow and neck. The silk of her jacket, once crimson and resplendent, now felt heavy and sodden against her skin, its embroidery darkened by rain and the grime of days at sea. She drew a slow breath, letting the cool air fill her lungs, tasting the subtle bitterness of gunpowder that still lingered from the last skirmish. Somewhere below deck, the crew's voices rose and fell, a rough rhythmic murmur of Cantonese and Teochew, punctuated by laughter, curses, and the clatter of bowls against wood. But above all, there was the sea, its ceaseless heaving motion beneath her feet, the slap of waves against the hull, the distant cry of gulls wheeling in the darkness. The South China Sea, ever mercurial, ever hungry. Tonight, its surface was a shifting tapestry of silver and black, broken only by the ghostly shapes of the red flag fleet. Dozens of junks bobbing at anchor, their sails furled, their banners limp in the fitful breeze. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sounds and smells wash over her, searching for calm. But inside, her mind was a storm. All its own, the weight of command pressed on her shoulders, heavier than the wet silk that clung to her arms. Chung Mern's absence was a wound that refused to close. It had been days since the typhoon, a sudden roaring fury that tore through the fleet like a predator, snatching ships and men alike into its maw. It had taken him, too. One moment, he'd been at her side, shouting orders above the wind, his voice a lifeline in the chaos. The next, he was gone, swallowed by the sea, leaving only a memory and a void. Now every decision was hers alone, every risk, every life and death. The men looked to her for orders, for hope, for vengeance, some with trust, others with suspicion. She could feel their eyes on her, even now, measuring, doubting, waiting, am I the storm? Or am I merely a survivor, washed up in its wake? The question gnawed at her, sharp as a knife. She had risen from nothing, a girl sold into a brothel, a woman who'd bargained her way into power with wit and steel. But this, commanding a floating empire of cutthroats and orphans, was something else entirely. The world of men was not made for women like her, not on land, and certainly not at sea. She opened her eyes, staring into the darkness ahead. Somewhere out there, the Qing Navy prowled, hungry for blood and glory. Somewhere, rival captains whispered of mutiny, of returning to the old ways. And somewhere, perhaps, Chungwing's spirit drifted beneath the waves, watching, judging I will not be swept away, she vowed silently, her jaw set, her eyes hard as jade. Not by wind, not by water, not by any man, living or dead. Lightning flashed, illuminating the fleet in stark, spectral relief. For a heartbeat, every mast and sail seemed etched in silver fire. The thunder that followed rattled her bones, but she did not flinch. Instead, she straightened her back, drawing strength from the storm itself. Tonight, she would face the ghosts in the water, her own, and those of every man who dared doubt the pirate queen. A sudden gust sent the nearest lantern spinning, its flame guttering dangerously low before flaring back to life. Footsteps thudded across the deck, quick, purposeful. Chung Po Tsai emerged from the gloom, his hair tied back with a strip of faded blue silk, his face drawn and serious. He paused a few paces from Ching Shih, bowing his head in deference, but his eyes flicked upward, searching hers for answers she did not yet have. "Mother," he said quietly, using the title she'd earned as much by cunning as by law. His voice was low, roughened by salt air and sleepless nights. The men are restless. They want to know what comes next. Ching Shih's lips tightened. She could hear the strain in his words, the unspoken fear beneath the formality. Chung Po Tsai had always been quick to learn, quick to fight, quick to sense danger. He was her adopted son, her most loyal lieutenant, but even he was not immune to doubt. "They think I should bring them home," she replied, voice steady. "Back to port, back to safety. Like frightened children running from the storm." She turned to face him fully, her eyes catching the lantern light. "But there is no safety. Not for us. Not now." Chung Po Tsai frowned, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Rain beaded on his brow, tracing silver lines down his cheeks. "They say the fleet is cursed. That Chung-un's death is a bad omen. Some want to follow Captain Wang back to the Pearl River. Others..." He hesitated, glancing away. "Others whisper about dividing the plunder, about going their own way." A surge of anger flared in Ching Shih's chest, hot and sudden. She gripped the rail harder, knuckles whitening. "Let them whisper," she spat. "Let them plot. I will not have this fleet torn apart by fear and superstition." We survived the storm. We will survive what comes next. Behind Chung Po Tsai, another figure approached, boots thudding on the wet planks. It was old Li, the quartermaster, his beard bristling with salt, eyes narrowed against the wind. He wore a patched coat of dark wool, its sleeves frayed, but his bearing proud. In his hands he clutched a scroll, an inventory of supplies, no doubt, but also a list of grievances. Lady Qing Old Li began, bowing stiffly. The rice stores are low. We lost 3 junks in the typhoon, and many barrels of gunpowder. The men grow hungry, angry. They need hope, or at least a plan. Ching Shih fixed him with a cold stare. And what do you suggest, Old Li? Do we crawl back to Canton, beg forgiveness from the Qing? Or do we hold fast, as pirates and as free men? Old Li's jaw worked, his eyes darting between Ching Shih and Chung Po Tsai. We are not fools, lady. The Navy hunts us. The merchants curse us. If we don't act, the fleet will tear itself apart. A tense silence fell, broken only by the slap of rigging and the distant rumble of thunder. Chung Po Tsai shifted closer, his voice urgent. Mother, the men trust you, but they need to see you lead. They need to see the red flag still flies. Ching Shi's mind raced. She studied their faces. Chung Po Tsai's young and earnest, Old Li's lined and wary. She saw the fear in their eyes, but also the hope, the desperate hunger for certainty. She stepped forward, letting the lantern light catch the gold embroidery at her collar, a symbol of her rank, of the power she had seized with both hands. Tomorrow we will call a council. All captains, all lieutenants. I will speak to them myself. They will hear my plan, and they will see that I am not afraid. Old Li nodded slowly, his shoulders relaxing just a fraction. Chung Po Tsai let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. But if any man doubts me, Ching Shih continued, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, let him come forward. Let him challenge me openly, not like a rat in the hold. I will show them what happens to traitors. A flash of lightning split the sky, illuminating her face. Hard, resolute, unyielding for a moment. Neither man spoke. Then Chung Po Tsai bowed again, deeper this time. As you command. Mother Old Li tucked the scroll beneath his arm, nodding, we stand with you, Lady Qing. So long as you stand with us, Ching Shih watched them go, their figures swallowed by shadow and rain. She felt the tension in her chest ease, but only slightly. The real battle was yet to come, not with the Navy, but with her own people. Her own ghosts. She turned back to the sea, the wind tugging at her hair, the taste of salt and fear sharp on her tongue. Somewhere out there. The dawn broke thick and gray over the South China Sea. Its sullen light barely pierced the rolling banks of mist that clung to the water like a shroud. From the deck of the lead junk, a battered but proud vessel with crimson banners snapping in the briny wind, Ching Shih stood, her silhouette sharp against the pale, indifferent sky. The sea was restless beneath her bare feet, the planks slick with dew and salt, trembling with the distant thunder of waves colliding against hulls. All around her, the fleet drifted at anchor. Hundreds of ships, their hulls painted in deep reds and blacks, masts bristling with tangled lines and patchwork sails, the air thick with the scent of tar and wet rope. She breathed in, letting the ocean's tang fill her lungs, mingling with the faint, acrid smoke from last night's cooking fires still hanging in the air. Somewhere close by, a sailor coughed, hacking up the last vestiges of sleep and the night's rice wine. The cries of gulls echoed above, sharp and hungry, circling for scraps. Below decks, the groan of timber and the soft shuffle of feet spoke of a crew already restless, waiting for orders, for certainty, for the next storm to break, whether of weather or of war. Ching Shih's hands rested on the rail, fingers calloused and scarred but steady. The wood was rough beneath her touch, worn smooth in places by years of salt and sweat. She could feel the heartbeat of the ship, the slow living pulse of something forged from fear, hope, and blood. Her gaze swept the horizon to the east, the first hints of sunlight caught on the crests of waves, turning them to molten silver. To the west, a bank of clouds promised rain, heavy and bruised. Inside, a storm churned to match the one on the horizon. She was alone now, truly alone, for the first time since Chung Mur's death. The memory of that night still pressed at her ribs, a cold ache she could not shake. She could almost feel his presence beside her, the weight of his hand on her shoulder, the low rumble of his voice promising her the world. But the world had changed. The fleet was hers now, if she dared to claim it. If she could outmaneuver the men who circled like sharks, hungering for weakness. If she could silence the whispers that a woman could never rule. She closed her eyes, letting the wind whip her hair against her cheeks, tasting the salt on her lips, fear and excitement tangled in her belly. She was not the girl from the brothel anymore, nor the wife bound by another's name. She was Ching Shih, and the sea was wide, but power was a fragile thing, hard won, easily lost. Every eye in the fleet watched her now, weighing her worth, waiting to see if she would rise or be pulled under, like so many before her. She opened her eyes and stared into the thickening light, the red banners overhead snapping like the beat of a war drum. The world smelled of iron and brine, possibility and danger. She would not flinch. Not now. Let them come. Let them test me. I will show them what it means to cross the queen of the red flags. The morning's uneasy hush shattered as Chung Po Tsai strode across the deck, the boards creaking under his bare, nimble feet. His hair, tied tightly at the nape, gleamed black as lacquer, and his eyes flickered with the restless cunning of a fox. He wore a coarse blue tunic, faded and threadbare, but his posture was that of a prince, shoulders squared, chin high, every movement measured and alert. Behind him, a trail of junior officers followed, their faces taut with anticipation and something like fear. Ching Shih turned as he approached, her expression stony, but her eyes sharp and appraising Chung Po Tsai. Paused, bowing his head just enough to show respect, but not so low as to appear subservient. Mother, the captains are restless. Some say we drift too long. They want action, or answers. Let them want. The wind will shift soon enough. What do you want, Chung Po? He hesitated, glancing sideways at the officers. One, a burly man with a scar curling from brow to cheek, stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides. The man's sleeves were stained with old blood, the cuffs frayed from years of hard use. We serve the red flag, not a widow's whim. The fleet needs a strong hand, a man's hand. A hush fell, the creak of ropes, and the slap of water against the hull seemed to grow louder, filling the silence. Chung Po Tsai's jaw worked, his eyes darting between Ching Shih and the challenger. He stepped closer to her, voice low but firm. Mother has led us through tempests and Qing raids. Her mind is sharper than any blade aboard this ship. Are you so eager to test it, Captain Wu? I test what I see. The men remember Chung Ran's strength, not a woman's clever tongue. The time for talk is done. Ching Shih's lips curled into a thin smile. She stepped forward, closing the distance between herself and Wu. Her gown, a deep red silk, patched but regal, swishing around her ankles. The air between them crackled with tension, the scent of sweat and sea strong in her nostrils. Strength? Strength is more than muscle, Captain. It is knowing when to strike and when to wait. Do you wish to test me? Wu's fists tightened, knuckles whitening for a heartbeat. The only sound was the sigh of the wind and the distant bell of a fishing boat. The officers shifted uneasily, their eyes darting from Ching Shih to Wu, waiting for the first sign of violence. There is no need for blood, not among brothers. Mother, Ching Shih, will prove herself, as she always has. If she fails, the fleet will drown, and so will we. Ching Shih held his gaze, her own eyes dark and unblinking. If I fail, you may cast me overboard yourself. But until then, you will obey, or you will answer to the red flag's law. A tense silence stretched, broken only by the rhythmic slap of the sea. Wu glared at her, then spat again, turning on his heel and stalking away, his boots thudding against the boards. The officers hesitated, then trailed after him, their faces a mixture of relief and resentment. Chung Po Tsai lingered, shoulders slumping as the others disappeared below deck. He looked at Ching Shih, his voice dropping to a whisper. They watch you, Mother. Every move, every word. They wait for you to stumble. Let them watch. I will not stumble. I am with you. Whatever comes. She felt the warmth of his presence, the loyalty hard-won and fiercely guarded for a moment. The brine and smoke of the morning faded, replaced by the memory of laughter, of Chung Po as a boy, wild and fearless, clinging to her skirts as the world spun around them. Thank you. Now gather the captains. We meet at dusk. The red flag will not drift another night. He nodded, slipping away into the thinning mist, his steps light and quick. Ching Shih watched him go, the weight of command settling on her shoulders like a mantle of iron. They will test me, but I will show them what it means to rule. The scent of jasmine and sweat drifted on the air, mingling with the musk of incense and the tang of cheap wine. Ching Shih closed her eyes, and for a moment she was no longer on the deck of a pirate ship, but back in the shadowed rooms of the Canton brothel where her story had begun. The lanterns had glowed red and gold, their silk shades casting flickering patterns on the cracked walls. The air was always thick, sweet with perfume, bitter with the stink of desperation. She remembered the feel of rough cotton against her skin, the brush of strangers' hands, the sound of coins clinking in bowls. Every night she had watched the men who came and went, merchants with soft bellies and greedy eyes, Qing soldiers with arrogance painted on their faces. The pirate queen rises. The dawn broke with a bruised, uncertain light, painting streaks of violet and gray across the restless South China Sea. Wind scoured the water, whipping it into froth, and the air tasted of salt, and old iron Ching Shih stood at the prow of her flagship, the fierce Phoenix, her hands gripping the damp rail so tightly her knuckles blanched. Beneath her feet, the boards thrummed with the pulse of 100 men at work, boots thudding, ropes creaking, voices rising in a dozen dialects, all woven together with the sharp tang of sweat and the distant, comforting aroma of boiling rice from the galley below. The fleet stretched behind her, hundreds of red-tasseled junks bobbing like bloodied petals on the waves. Some were battered, their paint faded, their sails patched and stained from too many storms. Others gleamed with new lacquer and proud banners, their decks crowded with pirates, cleaning muskets, sharpening cutlasses, or mending nets with swift, calloused fingers. The air was alive with the squawk of gulls and the low, persistent hum of life. Men laughing, cursing, singing shanties that drifted across the water like prayers. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. Ching Shih could feel it in her bones, as keen and cold as the rising wind. She breathed it in, the scent of fear and ambition, the coppery undertone of blood not yet spilled. It was a scent she had come to know well. She straightened, her silk robe snapping in the breeze, a deep crimson, embroidered with golden clouds and dragons, the fabric heavy but comforting against her skin. The robe was a symbol, as much armor As the dagger sheathed at her waist, it marked her as the pirate queen, ruler of the Red Flag Fleet, and it carried the weight of every decision she made. Her eyes swept the horizon, searching for threats. The thin smudge of a merchant sail, the glint of a distant warship. But today, her true enemy was within rumors of theft, of men breaking her code, refusing her law. She tasted bitterness at the back of her throat, mingled with the briny air. They fear me, but it is not enough. Fear must be bound to loyalty, or it curdles into rebellion. Her fingers traced the rough wood, feeling the grooves worn by years of storms and battles. She remembered what it was to be powerless, to have her fate decided by men whose names she never knew. She would never return to that. Not while she drew breath. The wind picked up, carrying with it the distant clang of a bell, a signal from one of the smaller ships. Trouble! Ching Shih's heart clenched, a familiar blend of anticipation and dread. She drew a slow breath, letting the salt and smoke settle in her lungs, grounding herself. This is my fleet, my law, my sea, and I will carve order from chaos, whatever the cost. She turned, her eyes cold as polished jade, and strode toward the heart of her empire, where judgment and blood awaited. The main deck of the fierce Phoenix was a world of its own. Ropes coiled like sleeping serpents, lanterns swinging from beams, the air thick with the mingled scents of tar, fish, and the faint sweetness of incense, burning before a tiny shrine to Mazu, goddess of the sea. Ching Shih's boots thudded on the planks as she approached the gathering crowd, her presence slicing through the noise like a blade. At the center stood Chung Po Tsai, her adopted son and most trusted lieutenant. He was tall and lean, his hair pulled back in a tight knot, his face sharp as a hawk's. He wore a jacket of faded blue cotton, sleeves rolled to the elbow, revealing arms corded with muscle and old scars. His eyes flickered from the accused men, two pirates, heads bowed and wrists bound, to the queen herself. Mother, we have a problem. Ching Shih paused, letting the silence stretch. Around her, men shifted uneasily, the scrape of sandals and the nervous tap of fingers on hilts filling the space. The morning light caught the gold thread in her robe, casting a regal glow that made even the boldest hesitate. She nodded once. Speak. Chung Po Tsai's jaw flexed. These two were caught by the night watch, stealing silver from the communal chest. They tried to bribe the guards. When that failed, they begged for mercy. The accused men, one young, barely more than a boy, the other grizzled and hard-eyed, shivered in the cool air. The younger's lips trembled, his gaze darting from Ching Shih's face to the deck below. The older met her gaze, defiant, a flicker of challenge in the set of his jaw. Ching Shih's voice was soft, but it cut through the murmurs like a knife. You know the law, the older pirate spat, the glob landing near her boot. We fight, we bleed, We die for this fleet, and yet you hoard the best for yourself. What is a little silver to you?" A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. Ching Shi's eyes narrowed, her pulse pounding in her ears. She stepped closer, the scent of sweat and fear thick around the accused. "You think I do not bleed for this fleet?" she asked, her words slow, deliberate. "Every coin is earned with blood. Every meal, every patch of sail, every moment of peace is bought with risk. The law is what keeps us alive. Without it, we are nothing but rabble, waiting to be slaughtered by the Qing." Chung Po Tsai's voice was tight, his hands clenched at his sides. "Mother, what is your judgment?" The boy fell to his knees, tears streaking his dirty cheeks. "Please, Lady Qing, my mother is sick. My sisters are starving. I only wanted—" Ching Shih silenced him with a raised hand. For a moment, she saw herself in his desperation, the memory of hunger sharp and fresh, but the fleet watched, hungry for justice or for blood. She turned to the crowd, her voice ringing out, "What is the law?" A dozen voices answered, ragged but fervent, "No theft from the fleet, no betrayal, death to traitors." The older pirate's shoulders sagged, his bravado crumbling. The boy sobbed openly, clutching at her robe, the fabric warm and slick with his tears. Ching Shi's heart twisted, but her face was stone. She knelt, her silk pooling around her, and cupped the boy's chin. "You broke the law. But mercy is not weakness. You will keep your life, but you will work off your debt. You will serve in the galley for 1 year, without pay. If you steal again, you will die." She rose, turning to the older pirate. "You, who would sow discord, who would spit on the law that protects us all, you will be made an example." The man stared at her, hatred and fear warring in his eyes. Ching Shih nodded to Chung Po Tsai, who drew his sword with a hiss of steel. The crowd pressed in, the air thick with anticipation and dread. Ching Shih felt every eye upon her, weighing her resolve, her mercy, her ruthlessness. "This is the price of order," she thought, as the blade flashed and the law was enforced. The deck faded away, replaced by the shadowed hush of memory. Ching Shih was a girl again, feet bare and cold on the slick stones of Canton's alleys, the air thick with the reek of fish guts and coal smoke. Lanterns bobbed above the brothel doors, painting the night in bruised gold and crimson. She remembered the press of bodies, the clatter of dice in the gambling dens, the sly, knowing glances of women who had learned too early to read danger in a man's eyes. She remembered hunger, a gnawing ache that hollowed her belly and sharpened her wits. She learned to steal, first food, then coins, then secrets. She learned to listen, to watch, to wait for the moment when a careless hand left a purse untied or a tongue grew loose with rice wine. She learned that mercy was a luxury, and that the world would take everything if she let it. One night, the madam had caught her, fingers sticky with stolen sweets. The beating was swift and brutal, the sting of the cane raising welts on her skin. Afterwards, the madam had crouched beside her, breath sour with baijiu, and whispered, "You want to survive? Learn the rules, break them, and you will bleed." That lesson had never left her. Even now, standing at the head of a pirate armada, she felt the echo of that cane, the hot shame and cold resolve twined together. The law was not just survival, it was the only shield she had ever known. The world was a bruise of purple and gray as dawn crept over the South China Sea. Mist clung to the water like a shroud, swallowing the ragged silhouettes of the red flag fleet. The air was thick, salt and wood smoke, the tang of wet hemp rope, the faintest trace of gunpowder. Every hull groaned with the slow, restless movement of the tide, and the battered red banners above each mast hung limp and soggy in the morning stillness. Somewhere, a gull shrieked, its cry sharp as broken porcelain, then was lost to the hush of fog. Ching Shih stood at the prow of her flagship, boots planted wide on slick, creaking planks. Her cloak, dyed a deep crimson, the color of blood spilled and power claimed, clung damply to her shoulders. She watched the horizon, eyes narrowed against the pale, uncertain light. Every muscle in her body ached from sleeplessness, from the long vigil through the night, from the tension that had wound itself into her bones. The sea's chill stung her cheeks, and she tasted the brine on her lips. Behind her, the deck was alive with quiet, anxious activity. Pirates moved in the half-light, their voices low, their faces drawn. The scents of boiled rice and fish soup drifted from the galley, mingling with the ever-present reek of sweat and tar. Ching Shih's hand rested on the hilt of her dhow. A curved sword, its grip wrapped in faded silk, the blade oiled and ready. She felt the weight of it, the promise of violence, and let her fingers tighten until her knuckles whitened. A shudder passed through her, not from cold, but from the memory of last night's news. A fleet, vast and merciless, bearing the imperial dragon on its banners, was coming for her Admiral Kuo Lang. The emperor's own hound had set sail with orders to crush the red flag fleet, to drag Ching Shih in chains to Canton, or else send her head floating down the Pearl River. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the world around her. The dampness clung to her skin. The wood beneath her boots was rough and familiar, the air heavy with threat and longing. She listened for the faintest sound, the clatter of armor, the distant thunder of war drums, the hiss of oars slicing water, but heard only the uneasy murmur of her crew. How many times have I stood on this deck, waiting for the world to decide my fate? How many times have I bent the world to my will instead? Her mind raced with calculations. The number of ships she commanded, the loyalty of her captains, the stores of powder and rice, the depth of her enemy's hatred. She thought of Chung Po Tsai, her adopted son, somewhere among the fleet, brave, clever, loyal, but young, and perhaps too eager for glory. She thought of the men and women who followed her, some for gold, some for vengeance, some because she had given them laws and dignity in a world that offered neither. The mist began to thin, and the rising sun painted the clouds with streaks of gold and blood. Ching Shih opened her eyes, jaw clenched, heart pounding with a fierce, stubborn pride. The empire could send its armadas, its admirals, its threats. She would not bow. Not today, a sharp rap of knuckles on wood. Ching Shih turned Chung Po Tsai stood at the foot of the steps, his face pale in the morning light, his black hair pulled back in a tight knot. His tunic, once a rich blue, was faded from salt and sun, but he wore it with the easy confidence of a man twice his years. Mother, the scouts have returned. They saw sails, many sails, bearing the dragon. Admiral Kuo Lang is less than a day behind. Ching Shih studied him, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his hands curled and flexed at his sides. She motioned him closer, and he climbed the steps, boots thudding softly. The deck shifted beneath them, and a gust of wind sent the red banners fluttering in sudden agitation. Tell me everything. Her voice calm, a steady anchor in the rising storm. Chung Po Tsai's eyes flickered with anxiety. The imperial fleet is larger than we thought. 40 war junks, maybe more. They have new cannon, Western ones, the kind that can shatter a hull in one shot. Kuo Lang's men are fresh, well-fed. Their banners stretch as far as the eye can see. Ching Shih's lips pressed into a thin line. And our allies? Some are wavering. The Black Flag captains send word that the Emperor offers them amnesty if they turn against us. Greed and fear eat at their hearts. A shadow passed over Ching Shih's face. She glanced past Chung Po Tsai, catching sight of Li Feng, one of her oldest lieutenants, standing near the rail and watching them with narrowed eyes. Li Feng's coat was patched and stained, but he wore his sword like a badge of honor, and his gaze was sharp as a hawk's. Li Feng! Her tone brisk. Join us. Li Feng strode over, boots ringing on the planks. He bowed with stiff formality, then straightened, arms crossed over his chest. What news? Voice rough as gravel, Ching Shih nodded to Chung Po Tsai, who repeated his report. Li Feng listened, face unreadable, then spat over the side. We fought worse odds, but never with so many knives at our backs. If the Black Flags betray us, we'll fight them too. Let them try to take what's ours. Easy words, boy, but words don't stop cannonballs. Ching Shih raised a hand, silencing them both. The tension between her two lieutenants crackled in the air. A clash of youth and experience, of loyalty and suspicion. We will not be divided. Voice cold as steel. Not by the Emperor, not by fear. If the Black Flags waver, We remind them who leads the red flags. If Kuo Lang comes, we show him the price of arrogance. And if the gods themselves descend, then we teach them to fear a woman's wrath. A beat of silence. The distant clang of a bell drifted across the water, signaling the change of watch. The crew moved with renewed urgency, checking lines, inspecting weapons, muttering prayers to the sea gods. Tian Ho, the Empress of Heaven, patron of sailors, whose painted image watched from the prow shrine, her face serene amid chaos. Mother, if it comes to battle, will you lead from the front? Ching Shih's eyes softened. Just for a moment, she reached out and rested a hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension in his muscles, the heat of his worry. I will not hide behind others' swords, she said gently. I will stand where my people can see me. That is the only way they will stand for me. Then we fight. Ching Shih glanced from one to the other, her adopted son, her oldest friend. So much depended on their unity, on their courage. She felt the weight of their trust and the heavier burden of their fear. Go, she commanded. Ready the fleet, double the watch, and send word to the Black Flag captains. Remind them of the oath they swore and the fate of those who break it. As you command, Mother. Li Feng grunted and strode off. Barking orders, Ching Shih watched them go, her heart battered by conflicting tides, pride, dread, the fierce determination that had carried her from the gutters of Canton to the throne of the sea. Let the empire come. Let them bring their fury. I have survived worse storms than this. The memory rose unbidden, sharp as the tang of blood, soft as the silk curtains of her girlhood. Ching Shih saw herself as a young woman again, crouched in the shadowed back room of the flower boat brothel in Canton. The air there had been thick with incense and secrets, the sweet cloying scent of lotus oil masking the stench of sweat and cheap wine. Lanterns cast trembling gold across lacquered screens, and laughter drifted from the main hall, forced, brittle, edged with desperation. She remembered the feel of silk beneath her fingers, fine, slippery, but never hers to keep. She remembered the sound of coins clinking, the rough hands of men who thought her powerless, the way her heart hardened with every bargain. She remembered the sound of coins clinking, the rough hands of men who thought her powerless, the way her heart hardened with every bargain. Powerless. A bruised dawn crept over the South China Sea, its pale light struggling through a tangle of storm-torn clouds. The world was awash in a strange, metallic blue, the color of battered steel and faded bruises. Ching Shih stood on the splintered deck of her flagship, the Sea Dragon, her hands gripping the damp rail so tightly her knuckles blanched. The wood beneath her palms was slick with salt and rain, pitted by the claws of last night's tempest. The scent of brine and blood mingled on the air, as sharp as a slap. Somewhere below, the faintest whiff of rice congee drifted up from the galley, but it only made her stomach twist tighter. All around her, the red flag fleet was a battered beast, licking its wounds. Sails hung in tatters, crimson banners drooping like wounded birds. The cries of sailors echoed across the water. Orders barked in Cantonese. The slap of ropes, the low moan of pain as a medic stitched up a gash. Every sound was magnified by the hush that followed the storm, as if the sea itself was holding its breath. Ching Shih's body ached from the night's ordeal. Her hair, once coiled in a precise knot, now clung in damp threads to her neck and cheeks. Her tunic, dyed deep indigo, the fabric stiff with salt, was torn at the sleeve, exposing a line of bruises blooming purple and yellow across her arm. Beneath the layers of silk and cotton, her skin prickled in the morning chill, and a cut above her eyebrow throbbed with every heartbeat. She let her gaze travel the horizon, searching for the comforting sight of her full armada. Instead, she counted losses. 3 ships missing, 2 more limping with broken masts. The Empire's war junks, sleek, black, and merciless, had struck like sharks in the dark, and the betrayal from within had been as swift and deadly as any cannonball betrayal, she thought, the word tasting bitter. In her mouth, it was colder than the wind, sharper than the salt spray. She had always known that power was a knife held at the throat, yours or someone else's. But she had believed, perhaps foolishly, that her iron code and cunning could bind even pirates to loyalty. Now doubt gnawed at her, relentless as the tide had she grown too proud, too trusting of Chung Po Tsai, her adopted son and lieutenant, or too blind to the ambitions simmering below decks. The faces of her officers, once familiar, now seemed shadowed with suspicion. Each glance felt weighted, each silence thick with secrets. She drew a slow breath, filling her lungs with the cold, salt-laden air. The world tasted of endings and beginnings, the hush before another storm. The Empire would not give up. The traitors among her own would not rest. She could feel the eyes of her men on her, watching for any sign of weakness, any flicker of fear. "You are Ching Shih," she reminded herself, pressing her palm to the throbbing cut above her brow. "You have survived brothels and storms, assassins and emperors. You are the queen of the sea. If the world wants to drown you, let it try." But beneath her defiance, a whisper of worry threaded through her thoughts. How much longer could she hold this fleet together? How many more battles could she win before the tides turned for good? As the sun struggled higher, painting the clouds with gold and fire, Ching Shih straightened her back. The world was watching. Her enemies were closing in, and her own people teetered on the edge of rebellion. The next move would decide everything. The heavy thud of boots on the deck broke her reverie. Chung Po Tsai approached, his silhouette framed by the battered rigging. He was tall and lithe, his hair bound back with a red scarf, his eyes flickering with both worry and determination. His tunic was stained with seawater and something darker. In his hand, he clutched a battered scroll, reports from the night's chaos. Mother, the men are restless. They want to know who betrayed us. Ching Shih's gaze did not leave the horizon. And do you know, Chung Po Tsai, did you see who fired the lantern on the Golden Lotus? He hesitated, shifting his weight from foot to foot. The deck creaked under them, the sound echoing like a warning. I have my suspicions, but the crew is frightened. They need to see strength, punishment. If we hesitate, the Empire will smell blood in the water. She turned then, eyes narrowing. And what do you need, Chung Po? My trust? My forgiveness? I need your orders, Mother. I need to know we stand together. A silence stretched between them, filled with the distant clang of a bell and the caw of hungry gulls. Ching Shih studied his face, the sharp cheekbones, the set of his mouth. She remembered the boy he'd been, clever, hungry, desperate for approval. Now he was a man, and men had their own secrets. From the shadows by the mast, another figure emerged, Madame Fong, her quartermaster, a woman as sharp as a cleaver and twice as reliable. Her hair was streaked with gray, her hands calloused from years at sea. She wore a jacket of heavy black silk, embroidered with red dragons, and her eyes missed nothing, Queen. The crew wants blood. They say the traitor was seen sneaking below deck before the attack. Some whisper it was Captain Lei, others that it was one of Chung Po's men. My men are loyal. Loyalty is a coin easily spent, especially when the Empire offers gold and pardon. Ching Shih's eyes flicked from one to the other, weighing their words. Enough. We do not tear each other apart while the Empire circles. Find the traitor, yes, but do it quietly. No accusations without proof. If we wait, the crew will choose their own justice. You know what that means. She did. Pirate's justice was swift and brutal. A blade in the dark, a body thrown to the sharks. She saw the fear in his eyes, the worry that he might be next to fall under suspicion. We will watch. We will listen. But if you hesitate, Queen, you risk losing control. Ching Shih felt the weight of their expectations pressing in. She could smell the sweat and fear on the air, the coppery tang of blood not yet spilled. The deck vibrated with tension, every man and woman aboard watching, waiting to see what she would do. She drew herself up, letting the sea wind whip her hair back from her face. I will address the fleet at noon. Until then, no one leaves their post. Anyone caught spreading rumors will answer to me. Chung Po bowed, a flicker of relief in his eyes. Madame Fong simply nodded, her lips pressed thin. As they turned away, Ching Shih's heart pounded. Trust no one, she thought. not even those closest to you. The morning wore on, each moment stretching taut. As a drawn bowstring, the sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the storm. But the true storm, she knew, was just beginning. The creak of the ship's timbers and the salt on the wind drew Ching Shih back to another life, another storm. She closed her eyes and let memory pull her under. She was a girl again, she young, knees pressed to the floor of a Cantonese brothel. The air was thick with incense and sweat, silk curtains filtering the sunlight into shifting gold and shadow. The scent of jasmine oil clung to her skin, but underneath it all was the iron tang of fear. She remembered the rough hands of customers, the forced smiles, the way she learned to read a man's eyes, calculating danger, weighing opportunity. In those days, survival meant silence. She had learned to move like a shadow, to listen at doors, to gather secrets like pearls. Information was currency, and she traded it well. She remembered the first time she'd seen Chung Ai, the pirate lord, stride into the brothel with his crimson sash and his air of command. The room had gone silent. Every breath held. His eyes had found hers, sharp and appraising. And in that moment, she'd seen her future. Dangerous, yes, but hers to shape. The memory shifted. A storm at sea. The first time she had stood on the deck of a pirate junk. Lightning split the sky, rain lashing her face. She'd been terrified, her hands numb with cold, and the tide was turning, and so was she unbreakable. The dawn over the Baka Tigris was a bruised, trembling thing, bleeding pale gold and bruised plum across the restless sea. The sky hung low and swollen, heavy with the promise of summer rain. Its weight pressed against the water and the cluster of battered junks riding at anchor. The red flag fleet, once a crimson banner spread across the horizon, now seemed a battered handful of splinters, ships scarred, sails patched with mismatched cloth, paint stripped by salt and cannon fire. On the air, the scent of brine mingled with the acrid tang of smoke, and beneath it all, the faint, coppery ghost of old blood. Ching Shih stood at the prow of her flagship, her hands curled tight around the damp, splintered rail. The wood was cold and rough beneath her fingers, still trembling with the memory of last night's guns. Her boots, once lacquered and proud, were scuffed and sodden. The hem of her indigo robe was stiff with dried salt. The embroidered dragons that once shimmered along her sleeves now looked like faded ghosts, their gold thread dulled by weeks of rain and powder. She breathed in, slow and deep, tasting the oily smoke that drifted from the galley fires and the sharp, metallic promise of coming rain. Somewhere behind her, a gull screamed, a high, ragged note that cut through the low murmur of the waking fleet. Voices drifted across the water, men cursing as they bailed out rainwater, The bark of a junior officer, the slap of a deckhand's bare feet on wet wood. Ching Shih's gaze swept the horizon, searching for the telltale glint of enemy sails. She could smell the fear in the air, sour and thick, clinging to her crew like a second skin. It mingled with her own exhaustion, a bone-deep ache that no amount of willpower could banish. Her thoughts circled like sharks. They were ringed in, hemmed by the guns of the Qing and the Portuguese, and now even the British frigates waited just beyond the shoals, their hulls painted in war's somber blue. The world was closing in, and the sea itself seemed to recoil from her. This woman who had once ruled its every corner. Ching Shih felt the weight of every eye upon her, every hope and every doubt. She had built this empire with blood and fire, and now it trembled on the edge of ruin. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the wind whip her hair across her cheeks. The strands were coarse with salt, streaked with gray. She had never noticed before. In the darkness behind her lids, she pictured the map she knew by heart. The twisting inlets, the hidden coves, the river mouths where her ships had once vanished like ghosts. She remembered the taste of victory, sharp as rice wine, sweet as stolen lichés, and the way her heart had thundered with every new conquest. Now, her heart beat slow and heavy, each thud an echo of loss. I am not finished. Not yet. Not until I have wrung every last drop of freedom from this world. Not until I have bent even the empires to my will. She opened her eyes. The rain began to fall, soft as a blessing, cold as a warning. Ching Shih straightened her spine, feeling the ache in her shoulders and the fire in her belly. She would not go quietly. If the world wanted her surrender, it would have to pry it from her clenched, unbroken fists. A sharp knock sounded at the cabin door behind her. Ching Shih turned, her movements fluid despite her fatigue. The door swung open, revealing Chung Po Tsai, her adopted son, her most trusted lieutenant. He wore his battle jacket open, rainwater streaming from his hair in dark rivulets. His eyes, sharp and restless, flicked over her face before dropping to the deck. "Mother," he said, voice low, "the men are gathering. They want to know your decision." Ching Shih studied him for a moment, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers drummed nervously against the hilt of his dao. He was older now, no longer the boy she had pulled from the gutters of Canton, but a man shaped by war and loss. His face bore new lines, his eyes the haunted gleam of one who had watched too many friends die. "Let them wait," she replied, her tone even. "Let them remember who commands this fleet. They are frightened. Some say we should run. Others—" He glanced away, his voice faltering. "Others whisper of surrender." Ching Shih's mouth curled into a bitter smile. "And what do you say, Chung Po Tsai? Would you have us scatter like rats before the trap?" He met her gaze, defiance flickering in his eyes. We have fought for every inch of this sea, Mother, but we are hemmed in. Admiral Quo Lang's ships block the river. The Portuguese and British wait beyond the shoals. Even the wind seems to have turned against us. His words hung in the air, heavy as lead. Ching Shih watched him closely, noting the way his shoulders hunched, the way his breath came shallow and quick. She could feel the fear radiating from him, mingled with something sharper, guilt, perhaps, or shame. A sudden burst of laughter echoed from the deck below, sharp and brittle as broken glass. Ching Shih's eyes narrowed. "Bring in the officers," she commanded. "All of them. If we are to gamble, let us do so with open eyes." Chung Po Tsai nodded, vanishing into the rain-soaked corridor. Moments later, the cabin filled with the scent of wet canvas and unwashed bodies as the senior officers crowded inside. Among them was old Bo Lin, his beard stained with tobacco, his robe patched and threadbare. He bowed low, his movements stiff with age. "Honored lady," Bo Lin began, his voice trembling. "The men grow restless. Food runs low. Powder is nearly gone. If we fight, we may not last the week." Ching Shih's gaze swept the room. Every face was drawn, every eye shadowed with doubt. She let the silence stretch, feeling the tension coil tighter. "And if we surrender?" she asked, her voice cold. "What will the Emperor grant us? Mercy, a rope, and a shallow grave." Bo Lin hesitated, his hands twisting in his sleeves. "There are rumors, lady. The Qing have offered amnesty before. Some say they will spare those who lay down arms." A younger officer, eyes red-rimmed and wild, spat on the floor. "And when have the Qing ever kept their word? They would flay us and hang our heads from the city gates." The room erupted in shouts, voices overlapping, fear, anger, desperation. Chung Po Tsai stepped forward, raising his hands. "Enough!" he barked. "We are not dead yet. The lady will decide." Ching Shih studied them. Her heart pounding, she saw herself reflected in their eyes. A legend, a tyrant, a last hope. The room stank of sweat and old fear. She let the silence settle, then spoke, her voice steady as iron. "We have one weapon left," she said. "Our name, our legend. The empires fear us more than they hate us. If we surrender, we do so on our terms. Amnesty, freedom, the right to keep what we have earned." Bo Lin shook his head. "They will never agree." Ching Shih's lips curled. "They will, if they believe the alternative is worse. We threaten to burn every ship, to vanish into the mountains, to wage war from the shadows until the end of days. We force them to make a choice." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Chung Po Tsai looked at her, hope flickering in his eyes. "And if they refuse?" He asked. Ching Shih's gaze hardened. "Then we make good on our threat. We go down fighting, but we do not go quietly." For a moment, no one spoke. The rain drummed harder against the hull, the sound like 1,000 distant drums. At last, Bolin bowed his head. "We follow you, lady," he murmured. "To the end." Ching Shih nodded, her jaw set. "Prepare the white flags, and send word to Admiral Quo Lang, to the Portuguese and the British. Tell them the pirate queen wishes to talk." As the officers dispersed, Ching Shih remained alone in her cabin, the lantern's glow painting her face in flickering amber rain battered the roof, a steady, relentless rhythm that reminded her of the pounding of war drums in distant memories. She closed her eyes, letting the darkness draw her backward into the tangled corridors of her past. She was a girl again, hunched in the back room of the Canton brothel, the air thick with incense and sweat. The silk curtains were stained with old wine, the floor sticky beneath her bare feet. Outside, the city roared, rickshaw wheels. The dawn crept in slow and heavy, painting the sky above the Pearl River Delta with the bruised violets and golds of a world caught between storm and sunlight. The air was thick with the scent of brine and mud, tinged with the faint, acrid smoke of distant cooking fires. Ching Shih stood at the prow of her final command, the deck of her flagship slick beneath her bare feet, the wood worn smooth by years of salt and sun, and the relentless passage of men and women who had followed her into legend. The riverbank ahead shimmered with the promise of land. Land she would claim not with cannon or cutlass, but with a paper signed in the shadow of a dynasty. Around her, the ship stirred to life sailors, her sailors, the last loyal remnants of the Red Flag fleet, moved with the wary hush of those who have outlived too many storms. Their voices were low and uncertain, their faces battered by wind and worry. The ropes creaked as the sails furled, heavy with the scent of rain and old hemp. The river itself, wide and swollen from the season's storms, murmured against the hull, a ceaseless reminder of the world she was leaving behind. Ching Shih's hands, calloused and strong, gripped the rail. The wood was cool and damp beneath her palms. She could feel the tremor of the ship, the heartbeat of a beast she had tamed and ridden to the edge of empire. Her breath came slow, tasting of river mist and impending change. She lifted her gaze to the distant shoreline, where the city of Canton sprawled in the pale morning light, rooftops rising like dragon scales, smoke curling from temple incense and market fires, the cries of porters and hawkers drifting over the water. She was tired, not the exhaustion of sleepless nights or hard labor, but a bone-deep weariness that settled in her joints and behind her eyes. The years at sea had carved lines into her face, silvered her hair, and left her body lean and hard as driftwood. Yet beneath the fatigue, a current of anticipation flickered. Today, she would step ashore, not as a fugitive or a queen in exile, but as a woman who had brokered peace on her own terms. Her thoughts churned, sharp as the morning air. Was this truly freedom, or another gilded cage? The emperor's pardon glittered in her mind, heavy with the weight of bargains struck and secrets kept. She had outwitted admirals, outlasted storms, and bent the will of men to her own. But now the world demanded something different, a surrender, perhaps, or a transformation. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sounds and scents wash over her. The slap of water against wood, the distant clang of temple bells, the resinous perfume of incense drifting from the city. She remembered the girl she had been, the brothel's clever shadow, the pirate bride, the widow who had seized a fleet. Each version of herself lingered, whispering warnings and hopes. With a slow exhale, she straightened her back, the silk of her robe whispering against her skin. Today, the fabric was deep red, imperial, defiant, a final echo of the banners that once struck terror across the South China Sea. The embroidery shimmered with gold thread, dragons, phoenixes, waves, symbols of power, of rebirth, of the endless struggle between sea and shore. The ship drew closer to land, the anchor chain rattling out with a metallic groan. Ching Shih's heart thudded. The world was watching, waiting to see if the pirate queen would bow, or if she would find a new way to rule. The gangplank was lowered with a hollow thud, the wood echoing across the waterlogged docks. Ching Shih stepped forward, her posture regal, every movement deliberate. The silk of her robe brushed her ankles, damp from the river mist. She could feel the eyes of her crew on her, some fearful, some proud, all uncertain. Chung Po Tsai waited at the foot of the plank, his stance tense. He wore a dark blue tunic, stiff with sea salt, and his hair was tied back with a crimson ribbon. The young man's eyes flickered with emotion, loyalty, worry, and something like grief. He bowed as she approached, but his voice was low, urgent. "Mother," he said. The word weighted with more than blood. "Are you certain this is the path you wish to take? The city? It is not the world we know. There are knives there too, even if they are hidden behind silk." Ching Shih studied him, her gaze unwavering. "The sea has its own knives, Po Tsai. I have faced them all. The difference is, on land, the wounds are slower to bleed." He hesitated, glancing at the cluster of Qing soldiers in pale blue uniforms waiting on the dock. Their armor gleamed, lacquered and ornate, but their faces were wary, uncertain how to greet a woman who had once commanded more ships than the emperor himself behind them. The city pulsed with life, vendors hawking roasted chestnuts, the scent of sweet rice and ginger mingling with river mud, the clang of blacksmiths shaping iron. Chung Po Tsai's jaw clenched. They say the pardon is real, but what if it is a trick? Admiral Kuo Lang is not a man to forget humiliation. He may still seek your head. Ching Shih let a small, knowing smile curve her lips. Kuo Lang is a man of pride, not principle. He will honor the emperor's word, if only to save face. And if he does not, I will face him with the same steel I showed on the water." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "And what of the others? The fleet is scattered. Some say you have abandoned them. They fear retribution, from the law, from their own." She reached out, pressing a calloused palm to his cheek. "I have never abandoned my family, Po Tsai. But there is a time for every empire to end. The sea is restless. The world changes. We must change with it, or be swept away." He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch for a heartbeat. "And you? What will you become ashore?" Ching Shih's gaze drifted past him to the city, a woman who survived, a woman who remembers. A sharp voice cut through their exchange. "Madam Ching." The speaker was a Qing official, his robe of pale blue silk edged with gold, a jade seal hanging from his belt. His face was smooth and unreadable, his eyes sharp as a hawk's. He bowed, but the gesture was shallow, perfunctory. "You are to be escorted to the governor's yamen. The terms of your amnesty will be discussed." She inclined her head, her expression polite but cool. "Of course. Lead the way." As they walked, the soldiers fell in around her, their boots splashing in puddles, the scent of wet earth and iron rising with each step. Chung Po Tsai walked at her side, his hand resting near the hilt of his dagger, eyes flickering from face to face. The city unfolded around them, narrow alleys hung with red lanterns, shopkeepers sweeping the stone steps, beggars huddled in doorways, the clatter of rickshaws and the raucous laughter of gamblers drifting from tea houses. The official kept glancing at her, sweat beading at his temples. "You will forgive the precautions, Madam Ching. The Emperor's court is cautious. They remember your fleet's power." Ching Shih's smile was cool as river fog. "Caution is wise. I have always respected those who prepare for the worst." He hesitated, searching her face for threat or mockery. "You are not what I expected." She let the silence stretch, the sounds of the city swelling around them. Few women are, when you look closely. A faint flush colored his cheeks. He adjusted his robe, the silk whispering, and led them through a gate of carved stone dragons. The yamen loomed ahead, its roof tiles glistening with rain, banners fluttering in the damp wind. Guards stood at attention, their faces blank, the smell of lacquered armor and oiled steel mingling with incense from a nearby shrine. Chung Po Tsai shot her a sidelong glance, his eyes troubled. "Do you trust them?" Ching Shih's answer was quiet, but certain. "No, but I trust myself." As they crossed the threshold into the jaws of power, the world seemed to hold its breath. Ching Shih's heart beat steady and slow, each step a promise. She would leave this place not as a prisoner, but as a legend.